the provincial and federal governments both have a role in leadership to play, but the responsibility for the fate of those animals, especially if it's a negative one, rests entirely on Marineland.
Closer look on this Monday, the 6th day of October. What a great weekend.
It was a good weekend for you. Nothing beats October. October baseball, there's nothing like it. I have to give your Jays credit. I mean, the first game they wiped them out, and then I thought, okay, the Yankees are going to make a statement game 2. And then
That's what I thought, too.
It was worse game 2.
It was just an absolute blowout.
Unbelievable. I'm not watching too close to Jays games. So what is it? Just everybody hitting the ball, or what's
Everybody's hitting the ball. Pitching's been solid. I mean, Trey is Savage.
That kid yesterday. Wow.
22 years old. Started the season in A-ball.
Yes.
He's pitched 3 games in the bigs.
That's baseball, right? Every October, there's someone who comes out of nowhere, especially a pitcher. They come out of nowhere. I remember when David Price years ago made his.
Yes.
Remember he came up with Tampa Bay and he became their closer for those playoffs and just knocked everybody out. That's the great thing about October. There's nothing like October baseball.
Nothing.
People say baseball is boring, but it's so intense watching a playoff game in baseball. I don't know how people could say that.
Your Tigers?
My Tigers, they I don't want to use the word stole. They earned a win in game 1, and then yesterday they couldn't quite finish it off and didn't make it happen. But they're going home now with home field advantage. 2 out of 3 series now.
Yes.
Two at Comerica. I'm looking at tickets for the potential ALCS Tigers Jays. That would be the dream come true.
Costly?
Very costly.
Very costly. Well, if I made your money.
Yes. Oh, you're funny.
That's just lunch money to you, eh?
Yes. I'm going to take everybody. I'm taking the whole staff. We're all going. We're
hopping on the Village PJ and we're going to Detroit.
Yes. Speaking of money, I think I'm also going to help pay for feeding the whales at Marineland.
$2 million a month?
That's insane.
That is crazy.
I read that and I thought that can't be right.
Typo. That's what I thought.
So apparently that's one thing we're going to talk about today. $2 million a month to feed these 30 and care for these 30 beluga whales at this now shuttered Marineland. Remember Marineland, the commercials? Everybody
loves Marineland.
It was on all summer, outside of the commercial. But not many people are loving Marineland these days. They've been closed down. They've been the subject of hundreds of visits from animal welfare officials for the province. The feds passed a new law years ago that changed a lot of things. We're going to talk about that today. But basically we're at a point now where the owners of Marineland, it's not open anymore, but they still have the whales and they're caring for them, wrote to the federal Fisheries Minister last week saying that unless you give us some money, we're going to have to euthanize these whales because they'd actually asked to export them and to sell them or give them to a facility in China. The feds said no. And they're saying, well, if you don't give us some money, we're going to have to euthanize these whales, which is, as you can imagine, it's caused a lot of anger and controversy and people are upset. So we're going to talk about that today.
We certainly are with Aaron Ryan. Aaron is the Wildlife Campaign Manager at World Animal Protection. Marineland says it is cash-strapped and needs assistance from the federal government or will be forced to euthanize the 30 beluga whales it still has in its possession, the only remaining captive whales anywhere in Canada. Here to help us understand what's really going on is Aaron Ryan, the Wildlife Campaign Manager at World Animal Protection. Aaron, nice to see you. Welcome to Closer Look.
Well, thank you for having me.
Aaron, we'll get into the situation in a second, but let's start with your organization. Tell us more about World Animal Protection and its mission.
So World Animal Protection has been around for more than 75 years. We have countries in 12 offices across the world. And in World Animal Protection Canada, the majority of our supporters live in Ontario and are really looking for us to leadership on this issue, which we've done for many, many years.
Now, your organization has been advocating for change at Marineland for a very long time. Can we give our listeners and viewers, Aaron, a bit of a history lesson? Back in 2019, the federal government passed a piece of legislation that had a major impact on the facility. What did that legislation do?
Exactly. So in 2019, Canada passed Bill S-203, which made amendments under the criminal code that would ban the captive breeding, keeping, and performances of cetaceans. So that's whales and dolphins, like the ones at Marineland. So at the time, Marineland was sort of grandfathered in under that legislation. So it was understood that those would be the last animals at Marineland. And at the time, back in 2019, Marineland had up to 55 belugas. Wow. And since then, there have been a string of deaths, including, I believe, since the passage in 2019, we're down to 19 belugas, an orca, and a dolphin have died since the time of that bill's passage.
When I read that this morning, I couldn't believe those numbers. Just taking us back to that time period, I assume Marineland fought this law pretty hard because that's basically their whole business, I would assume, right? Yeah.
Indeed. And at the time, they were really the last facility in Canada that had any type of beluga whales.
Mm-hmm. And so at that point, then, they weren't even allowed to – all the commercials we all remember, the shows they would do, those just ended in 2019 because of this law?
More or less. And of course, the park opened last year with pretty limited accessibility to the public. And this year, the park didn't open at all.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. But they did stay open a little bit so people would just walk around and look at the whales. That's what the operation was, basically?
More or less, yeah.
I see. And Aaron, I think if I read right as well, the Provincial Animal Welfare Services has visited the site hundreds of times since 2020, doing various different inspections. What have they found over the years?
So that's exactly right. They have visited a number of times, and it's no surprise given, sort of the storied history with which the park started. Some of the complaints that they've seen have involved issues of water quality for the marine mammals, down to downright distress for some of the terrestrial animals. Mm-hmm. I know a number of bears were actually seized from the facility, and people are surprised to hear that native animals like black bears are at a facility like Marineland.
Aaron, have you been there? What's your organization observed?
So it's been a long time since I visited this facility, but if I can get personal for a moment, I remember visiting Marineland when I was a kid. So a West Coast kid visiting Marineland with the family, and what we saw left me in tears because I couldn't believe that there were so many animals packed into these tiny facilities, and it just felt inherently wrong to me. And to be fair, I don't disparage anyone for having gone to Marineland in the past or thinking that it's an interesting thing to see. But, the reality is when we know better, we do better. And I think Canadians, especially since 2019 with the passage of the bill, have made very, very clear that they want to see better.
And I know that the place has been up for sale since about 2023. And the big sort of stumbling block is what to do with the whales that were there. Now, we just want to make sure we explain this right to our listeners and our viewers. The facility asked for the federal government's permission to export these whales to a facility in China. Is that accurate?
Yes. So under this bill that was passed, they would need permission from the federal ministries in order to do that. And what has now happened is that Marineland has applied for an export permit to export all the remaining whales to a facility in China. And the federal fisheries minister has denied that export permit, which I think is an incredible move and just really in solidarity with what Canadians have said they expect.
I was going to ask that because they're saying if we export them just to another place with captivity, and it might even be worse than where they are now.
Yeah,
exactly.
I know that the federal minister talked about how she's opening to look at other decisions, but what she's really saying is beluga whales belong in the ocean.
Right.
This is a dumb question, Aaron, but is that even possible? Could you put these whales back in the ocean?
There are limited options, but we do have some hope. So one of the options that we're advocating for multi-government collaboration is the whale sanctuary project that's being developed in Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. So the sanctuary is not ready to take those animals yet, but between the leadership of Ontario, Ottawa, and Nova Scotia all working together, we could see them fast-tracking the development of this facility. Mm-hmm. So the animals could be cared for in place until such time as the sanctuary is ready. That said, the sanctuary would only be able to take a maximum of, I believe it's 10 animals. Mm-hmm. But the thing that we've been calling for, and World Animal Protection has been asking for many years before it was an emergency, was to bring together a meeting of stakeholders and expert technical advice on solutions. So China's not the only option. There could potentially be other aquariums across North America that might have the capacity to take on some of these animals.
Do you know of any? Have you done your research?
I wouldn't want to say that we know for sure of any facilities, but that there are options. But what we haven't done is bring all the right people to the table to discuss those options.
So now we got to the point now where Marineland's put out this letter asking for emergency federal funding. They're saying if you don't help us here, because you denied our request, if you don't help us, we're essentially going to have to euthanize these whales. That's what they're saying. You've touched on it, but what do you think should happen?
So one thing is that we don't believe it's the job of the federal government to be providing that funding. What their job is looking at the export permits and reviewing them, and they've done that. And I think they've made a very sound decision in denying the export permit. What we're asking for now is leadership from the provincial government to exercise their authority under the Provincial Animal Welfare Services Act to immediately seize sort of possession of those animals and start immediately providing care in place. So leaving the animals where they are, but bringing in external experts, independent veterinary assessment, and help to make sure that those whales are cared for while we convene sort of an immediate emergency solutions meeting to figure out what the longer term next steps are going to be.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but would they actually euthanize these whales, or are they just trying to use this as maybe some leverage to get the whales relocated?
You know, I can't pretend to assume what Marineland would or wouldn't do. It's certainly an option as private owners. This is, again, why we're asking the provincial government to step in as soon as possible so that that doesn't become an option without, all checking all the right boxes and going through all the steps to make sure that euthanasia is really an option that would be within the best interest of the animals. And that hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. That assessment hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm. And just so everyone knows, the letter gave a deadline of tomorrow, October 7th, right. For an answer. Just back to what you said, Aaron, about the provincial government getting involved, potentially seizing these whales, taking possession of what's going on. How would that actually work? I mean, this would be a costly endeavor for sure. Would they just take over the facility? What's the best way forward?
Indeed. And one of the things we've asked is that the provincial government, I want them to make sure they're fully understanding and communicating what legal authorities they have. And we want to make sure that Marineland's not just off the hook, right? Because, of course, it is an expensive endeavor, but they are sitting on substantial assets, including the actual land they own. Mm-hmm. So that could potentially be used. But the idea is that we're not letting them off the hook. We're going to hold them financially accountable by whatever legal means necessary. And I encourage the province to understand and communicate what options they have to that effect.
So what you're saying is you're thinking the province is more under the gun here to do something than the feds. The feds have done what they're supposed to do. They've denied this export permit. Are you saying that if something happens to these whales, it's on the province?
I think the failure to do anything rests completely on Marineland. We have been sounding the alarm for this for years, and it's not necessarily fair for Marineland to claim that their lack of planning is now either the province or the federal government's emergency. It really is up to them. So I do want to make sure that I believe the provincial and federal governments both have a role in leadership to play, but the responsibility for the fate of those animals, especially if it's a negative one, rests entirely on Marineland.
Aaron, we've read that it costs approximately $2 million a month to feed and care for these whales. That sounds pretty extreme. Is that an accurate figure?
Again, with a lack of transparency for Marineland, we don't know fully. In some of the conversations we've had with experts around the world, we believe that that's a bit of an overreach is our best conversations with experts. But again, without transparency, we don't fully understand and we don't fully know.
It's definitely an urgent situation, though, right? Like you said, it's been going on for years, but this is a pretty urgent moment where we have this park, at least in what they're saying publicly, that we're going to euthanize these animals if we don't get money by this week. Maybe it's an unfair question, Aaron, but how nervous are you about what's going to happen this week?
It's hard. It's been a lot of moving pieces, even in the last couple of days. We're seeing new news every day, and we're getting no two-way communication with Marineland, and that's been a problem for a number of years. So on the one hand, I'm nervous about the fate of the animals. On the other hand, I am optimistic about the leadership the federal and provincial governments are trying to show and the concern that they're trying to show. Of course, we know that Marineland is just a symptom of the larger issue of roadside zoos and a lack of captive wildlife legislation in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's helpful that whenever I hear Premier Doug Ford talk about this issue, he seems very sympathetic, that he's concerned about these whales? He seems to have a sympathetic stance on things. Do you think that will be helpful in the long run as we see what plays out this week?
I do. It's certainly helpful when we see people in positions of authority that do care about animals. And I do see that genuine care and concern reflected in some of the statements that Premier Ford has made to the media. And it also brings me hope that, he'd be the type of person willing to take on leadership in finding a solution and not simply exporting the problem without a full due process of what could and should be done.
All right, Erin, before we let you go, anything that we didn't touch on tonight that you'd like to bring up?
I think one of the things that I would like to keep focusing on is, yes, we've all got our eyes on Marineland right now, but we do need to keep remembering the greater issue of a lack of captive wildlife and zoo licensing in Ontario, and how important that's going to be to prevent future marine lands and to prevent future emergency situations like this.
All right, there's Erin Ryan, Wildlife Campaign Manager at World Animal Protection. Erin, we appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, interesting conversation. I'm a little shocked, though, that the best option that's being considered is to kill these poor whales.
Well, they're basically saying they have no money.
I get that.
They don't have a dime. So, I mean, imagine you trying to get your grocery bill. If your grocery bill is $2 million a month, I don't mean to laugh. It's not funny. But they're basically saying we have no money. I also, every good negotiator tries to use some tactics.
For sure.
If you don't give us this money, the whales die. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know if that would actually be the case. But if you do watch Premier Ford talk about this, he gets very emotional about it. He's
very genuine.
A self-proclaimed animal lover, and doesn't like to hear that wasn't happy that the feds said no, even though the animal welfare groups are plotting the feds because they're saying don't send the whales to another place of captivity where they're probably going to be bred again and put on display and put in shows. He's saying at least it gets them out of Marineland.
Yeah.
So
and he does look like he cares.
He does look like he cares, and as Erin said, that might be the thing. But you're right. Could you imagine that by tomorrow or the next day, Marineland says we've euthanized 30 beluga whales?
I can't imagine.
Like it would be bedlam. It'd be crazy.
It would be. Hopefully, somebody steps in and gets something done, or they find an arrangement.
I'm sure someone will watch this show and it'll get action.
Doug Ford. And I'd expect nothing less from the 800-pound gorilla. You
thought 800-pound whale. I was like, what are you talking about?
I think they weigh more than that. Yeah. And if you saw our episode with Vic Fideli, you'll understand that reference. That's what he calls himself to Vic, apparently. Okay, that's it for us tonight on Closer Look, closerlookpodcast.ca. And, of course, if you have any questions about the program, we'd love to hear from you. Closer Look at villagemedia.ca. For Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief here at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7 right here on Closer Look.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.